An obscure but interesting story came to my attention recently. To emphasize right up front, this original story is not remotely Nintendo related, but it does shed interesting light about one facet of the Japanese gaming industry. And once we've looked at the story itself, I think it's worth considering how Nintendo also navigates these waters. As reported on Automaton and shared on the Time Extension website, there was a personal anecdote from an experienced game developer on social media of what he identified as ageism. This is from Tokihiro Naoto of the Hyderlight series. I will confess, my past impression of Hyderlight just from its reputation is not the best, with Virtual Hyderlight on the Sega Saturn especially always seeming like a particular example of a major misfire on the console. But I feel a little regretful about that bias, having learned that there were actually quite a number of Hyderlight titles and learning a little more about its developers' recent experience. As translated by Automaton Media, he said, "When I was on the verge of becoming unemployed at 50 after my employer decided not to renew my contract, I applied to nearly 100 companies, but about 90% of my applications were rejected at the document screening stage. The reason cited was my age. They didn't even bother to look at my skills." End quote. Automaton adds, shockingly, the developer reveals that among the companies that did offer him an interview, some admitted to only doing so they could have a chance to meet Naito Tokihiro, even though they were not actually considering him for the job to begin with. In the end, Naoto says he managed to secure a job only thanks to a stroke of good luck and personal connections. Another developer commented, 2 years ago, I was in a similar situation and applied to 25 companies for the same type of work as my previous job. I only got interviews with 2 companies, which I presume hadn't even looked at my resume beforehand. The interviews were awful and neither hired me. They cited my age as problematic and even insulted me personally. Now, evidently, ageism is a very real and pressing issue across many industries and seems to be particularly present in Japan. Now, to play devil's advocate for a moment, just because someone is upset on social media doesn't necessarily mean their specific complaints are justified in this instant. Job hunting is difficult. Job hunting in a competitive industry even more so, and while experience counts for a lot, the video game industry is fast moving and newer creators may be able to get a leg up by embracing new technologies and opportunities, as well as simply being more aligned with their target audiences who tend to be younger. Also, I must admit that my own grim fascination with Virtual Hyderlight would have given me a fascination with his developer, but not necessarily an enthusiasm for his work. Still, the core issue here appears to be an automated screening out of older developers and, of course, the disrespect being shown. Now, there are specific issues that Japan faces as well. Japan doesn't seemingly have ageism laws, and its culture is one of respecting seniority, making it difficult for younger studio chiefs to hire older developers for fear of losing control of their own studios by essentially importing a more senior figure. Added to this, sacking people is rare in Japan, and the country has ways of freezing people out to shame people into retiring. It might be perceived that there is a greater risk hiring someone at the end of their career than the beginning, as if it doesn't work out, there's not much incentive for older people to jump in the same way. Still, with Japan's demographic challenges as they are, the country will require people to work for longer if they are going to manage to keep their economy afloat. Now, what about the Nintendo of it though? Well, Nintendo's status as the top of the industry means it can afford to be highly selective about who it hires, but also they must be fastidious about having robust hiring practices. Its own inclusion policies confirm that employees are, I quote, able to work regardless of age, but the nature of much of age discrimination is that it is insidious. We do have recent evidence of mid-career developers joining Nintendo in senior roles, however. Specifically, Donkey Kong Bonanza director Kazuya Takahashi. Another example, perhaps, is Zelda director Hidemaru Fujibayashi, who only joined Nintendo in his mid-30s, but since he had been working on Zelda games for Capcom for many years prior, this is perhaps not a very good example. The fact is, the vast majority of Nintendo's Japanese developers appear to join very early and stay for a very long time, with most of Nintendo's senior team having had decades in post. Part of this is a philosophical issue. Nintendo prides itself on having a unique Nintendo approach that takes a long time to learn and can't be taught by rote but must be experienced and gradually imbibed. By focusing on graduate hiring, Nintendo has a chance to train people as they wish. There seems to be some flexibility here, however. Metroid Dread director Fumi Hayashi started in sales, while assistant producer on Emio the Smiling Man, Kaori Miyachi, had a production background before Sakamoto tempted her over to more of the creative side, planning out the narrative to Emio. There were also many people who started as artists, including the two chiefs of the whole of the EPD team at Nintendo, responsible for games, Shinya Takahashi and Yoshiaki Koizumi, and a gentleman known to some people called Shigeru Miyamoto, who also started as an artist. There are also times when they have brought in external expertise, such as when in the 80s they hired animator and character designer Yoichi Katabi to help with the character designs for Nintendo. It's not exactly a big secret that in an American context, Nintendo has been busy collecting a murderer's row of the best and brightest in the game industry to bring us Metroid Prime 4. And of course, Nintendo has partnered up with many more experienced game developers, but normally by subcontracting them through their own external companies rather than by hiring them directly. From Davide Soliani, formerly of Ubisoft, to Hideki Kamiya when he was at Platinum, and Etsunobu Abisu at Goodfeel, there are many such examples. There are also people who have left Nintendo and then returned, such as Nintendo software technology veteran Vivek Malwani, who seemingly left Nintendo to teach at neighbouring campus DigiPen, but then returned after several years away. Another complicating factor is that Nintendo has only relatively recently started hiring on such a large scale. While it does have some need for Takahashi-style experienced hands who can lead big projects, it probably has a more urgent need to utilize the many experienced people who have been with the company for a long time, especially to stop its top talent leaving for other pastures, as happened with Infinity Nikki developer and former Zelda top talent Kentaro Tominaga. In recent years, many of Nintendo's smaller satellite studios have closed down, including long-standing partners like Skip of Chibi Robo fame, Vanpool of the Dylan series, and which served as a support studio on many Kirby titles, as well, of course, as Mario and Luigi developers Alpha Dream. Many of these people have now turned up in other companies, such as ILCA and Acquire, but while I'm sure that there have been people who have been hired by Nintendo directly, I struggle immediately to think of anyone despite a bit of time browsing the credits before now. Now, Nintendo is a big employer, but still only a fraction of the jobs open in the game industry in Japan, and although they do have a Tokyo base, the bulk of their hirings will still be for Kyoto. It's also the case that they release games less frequently than other studios, so it might take years for it to become apparent if some of these people have actually joined on Nintendo projects. After all, Kazuya Takahashi had been at Nintendo 5 years before he was confirmed as the director of Donkey Kong Bonanza. And knowing Nintendo's willingness to shelve projects if they're not meeting expectations, it's possible that people could go for a very long time indeed without receiving any actual credit. There's never been any accusation that I can find of ageism on Nintendo's part, but I can see how the nature of the way the company operates could make it difficult for mid-career developers to find an easy way in. The fact is, though, Nintendo's hiring is so competitive that it's going to be difficult for anyone of any age to get in, and so this in itself doesn't say very much. It's also likely that because Nintendo is primarily targeting entry-level positions and seems to manage to keep its graduate recruits for the long haul in most cases, they might naturally not attract more experienced talent. They also have the luxury of being able to work with a very large number of external teams, which means that when they find someone they consider a great talent, a Hidemaru Fujibashi for example, they can persuade those people to make the jump at the appropriate time, or indeed just buy out a company as they did with Next Level Games. Still, with the flurry of recent hirings, I will be interested to see in future credits if we start to see more mid-career people turning up at Nintendo. Thanks so much for watching, thanks to the channel's Patreon supporters, do check out the videos on screen, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.